Hey guys, Def Camp here from Def Camp and Melderon TV.
Hey everyone, this is Melderon from DefCamp Melderon TV as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Chimley. I'm from the Chimley channel on YouTube. Hey.
So today, guys, we have something really special for you. We're going to be doing this is a collaborative work that we're going to be exploring the music of Classic WoW and what made it really special. So, DefCamp, what's some of your favorite tracks from Classic WoW?
So, as you know, I started my first character on Alliance, and I gotta say, I guess because of that, Teldrassil has a really big place in my heart, as well as the Stormwind music and the Sacred music. But I'm also a huge fan of the Winterspring music, Stranglethorn Vale, Barrens, and of course, one of my favorites is Tearsful and anything undead, really. So, I guess you say pretty much.
Did you leave anything for me?
Yeah, that's a wide range.
Right, pretty much everything. But yeah, those are some of my favorites. And then as far as the Shadowfang, well, I'll let you guys get some.
Okay, thanks.
There, so.
For me, it's definitely Thunder Bluff. And Chimley, you've covered that in Scorecraft, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I got to say it's one of my favorites too. It was really interesting exploring that because it sounds so simple on the surface of it, but it took me ages to do this. There's a lot you can talk about, and I had to cut a lot of it from that video too. But yeah, I love the tribal drumming and all of that. Yeah. It really makes you feel like you're part of it.
Yeah.
So, Chimley, if our audience doesn't know, what is your experience, a real life experience with music?
Right. Well, I just graduated this year with a degree in music from Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester in the UK.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's finally over. So my training was as an opera singer, but part of that I did a lot of musicology too. So studying, analyzing music, looking at the history of it, and trying to pick apart how it works. And my final dissertation project was specifically about video game music.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like honestly, that's a topic for another day. That goes real deep. Basically, I ended up pulling apart like the fundamental way that people look at video game musicology. Yeah. They asked me if I wanted to do a doctorate, and I said, "No, sir, because I need a break from university. Maybe later."
Take it from me. Take a break.
Told us all about the doctorate. I feel like my music career is a lot less. I'm self-taught in a couple things, but yeah, that's about it.
Oh, that's great. Like, there's nothing better or worse about that. Like, I got into the musicology side of things from going to a music school. So I only started music when I was about 15 or 16 or something.
Okay.
And then, so I was very late to it. But thankfully, with singing, that's not a downside. If you're a violinist, you got to be playing from a young age. But you only really, especially as a guy, you only have a voice to play with when you're from about that age anyway. So
correct.
That's fine.
So, using your knowledge and your academic knowledge of music, what is it about? I know I'm not the only one. Classic WoW music sticks with you, and when you hear it, this flood of nostalgia comes back. Why do you think that is? What do you think classic music does to us that's maybe unique compared to other video games or even other iterations of WoW?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I think the rose-tinted glasses argument is often used when it comes to classic, mostly in the context of gameplay and how we enjoy the game. And I think that's an interesting argument, and there's elements of that. But in the music, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we heard it at a very young age, so it imprinted on us very deeply. That's something we can't dismiss. It's definitely part of it. But other than that, I think these are really excellent pieces of music. Like the composition, the style, the expertise that goes into it. The more I dig into these pieces of music, the more I think, Jesus, okay, these guys knew what they were doing. This is really, Elywnn Forest. I'm going to do a video on that pretty soon. And
so good.
It's crazy. Like the way it works, it basically tells a story musically of a new character to the game. When I was just writing that script a while ago, it blew my mind whilst I was doing it. So I think it's a combination of the expertise of the people handling it, the fact that we heard it at a very young age and heard it often and associated it with a really positive experience, so that kind of imprinted it on us. And also, well, the stylistic choices and how they make the game's music we can get into in a second, but as just an overview, I'd say those two, the expertise and sort of how the memory forms at a young age.
Yeah.
And also, incidentally, I think that's part of the reason why Warcraft caught on so well and why it's so addictive. You know, I can't be the only person that heard the Elywnn Forest music when I was unsubscribed and thought, well, there goes my life again.
Exactly.
Oh,
I know exactly what you mean, man.
Yeah.
Like, I think the music in WoW really encapsulates everything that WoW is so well, right? Because, you know, that part of that role play feeling for me was the music and being into that environment. And, you know, say for me logging on in Teldrassil the first time and hearing that magical music from Teldrassil, it's like it really puts you into that fantasy world. And they did such an amazing job with the terrain and the music. And they accompanied them together so well that it really set the mood for everything. And it just set this whole adventure, and the music is really such a big part of that. I would argue just as big a part as the visual for me.
Absolutely. And we're talking about that Teldrassil piece. I've realized something not too long ago, that I think they were really clever with how they did the elf music in Warcraft, in that they use a mode, and a mode basically, it's a scary sounding word. All it means is a type of scale. So, you know, a major scale, right. That's a kind of mode. So yeah, the Teldrassil music you just talked about there, I was watching the Lord of the Rings music not too long ago, and I almost, you know, stepped out of my seat in shock. Like, what the hell? So it's exactly the same mode that they're using in the Rivendell section of the Lord of the Rings music score, and stuff that happens in like Teldrassil, Ashenvale, all of that. They're using a particular style of mode, which is a scale, basically. You know, Ionian mode is a major scale, Aeolian mode is a minor scale. There are other kinds of scales that just use different modes. Like a lot of folk music uses these things. So that, I think, going back to how it had a big effect of you, you were expecting that somehow because you'd heard the Lord of the Rings music already, and Lord of the Rings itself is what informed D&D, which then informed Lord of the Rings, among other influences. And so even the music has that same heritage, you know, coming from the adaptations of Tolkien into. So it's interesting that it's sort of what we expected to hear, even though we didn't realize that.
That's amazing. That is so amazing, because like, you're absolutely right. Like, now that I listen to it and think about it, you can hear the similarities, but it's unique in its own way. But it is something that I expected, but they did such a good job in making it, in a way, you know, very Elven-like, but still making it very original in a way. And it's just beautiful.
It's not a very commonly used sort of musical language. It's not like classical music. This modal stuff and the way the harmony works in fantasy music is really specific. Like, you don't really see that used anywhere else, which is why it sounds so magical and ethereal.
So
mention something else.
I maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, because I dare say that classic WoW is simplistic, but however, I do feel that it's less bulky than current WoW. Of course, there's less there. Do you feel? But I also feel the music is a way. It's still beautiful, but it's also simplistic. Do you see that as well, Jimly?
In some senses, it's like a swan. You know, a swan is very graceful on the surface. It feels like it's effortlessly gliding, but you look underneath the water and there's a lot going on. It's, you know, kicking its feet really hard. All of that. That's sort of how this sort of music is. When I'm peeling back the layers, I'm thinking, oh crap, how am I going to put that in a script that people are going to understand? I think modern WoW is a lot more like a piece of music that is written for an orchestra, because it is. It's actually played by a big orchestra in one long go. And so the music of modern WoW is more like a piece of classical music that you go and see in an orchestra, in a concert. But back in classic WoW, they're like snippets of music. It's much more minimalistic. You see if you look into the game files to try and put these tracks together, for the videos I'm making, they're about a minute long, 2 minutes long, little fragments. So the Thunderbluff music was about 4 or 5 different tracks that were each about, some of them like 30 seconds, 40 seconds long. A couple of them were 2 minutes tops. And each of these tracks within these small little sections, they often have little areas of silence, or a lot more sparse playing. So they're very effective in their minimalism, a lot more so than in retail. So in retail, it's like very ostentatious, it's very present. When you're playing the game, you're being sort of given a musical description of what's going on, of where you are, and that's great. It helps you sort of get some of the story out of that.
Yeah.
But in classic WoW, like many things in the game, it's much more of a role-playing game than an action game. So the music takes a very much of a background role. So you're busy interacting with the game. Like, say you're in the Barrens, you're killing plane striders, whatever it is, and every now and then you'll notice on the periphery of your concentration, you think, oh yeah, there's that theme in the clarinet, and then it'll fade away, and there'll be some rustling of leaves and branches and wind across the prairie and all of that, and then a couple of minutes later you'll hear, oh, another theme, but it's playing these little small fragments in different orders. You're not listening. Like when I go into Boralus in retail WoW, there's this big blaring fanfare to begin with, and then after that little initial stinger is what they call it in musicology for games, a sting that you walk in and there's like bang, this like entrance motif. Okay, after that it'll play a bunch of like songs. They're quite long and you can follow them. Okay, it's like you're singing along to it in your head. You know exactly where it's going to go. But in the Barrens, it'll be playing these much shorter fragments in different orders, so you're not really able to sing along. It sounds like what the Barrens sounds like.
I think that's why it's lived on for so long, is because it's not this huge thing that shouts out and says, hey, listen to me, and then you hear it and you get bored of it, you hear it over and over. Like, we've been listening to this music for 14 years now, and every time I hear it, it never gets old, right? And I think that's because of how it was constructed in these short little snippets and in the background, and not over in your ear, in your face, kind of big shouty, but it's like it's almost just as much as part of the terrain as anything else.
Yeah, I like what Jimmy said, is that it's how the Barrens sounds. It isn't
exactly.
It isn't about what you think. It's the music isn't driving the narrative. You're driving the narrative, and the music is in the sidecar with you driving down the road. Right? It's I don't know. That makes sense, but
it's hand in hand with it. Yeah,
clarinet echoing over the hills. It's almost believable that it actually sounds like that, because it's not a huge orchestra playing. It's just one dude with a clarinet, and a couple of other guys. And so, for example, Thunderbluff's a great example of this. In fact, for my end of year project thing in uni, I mentioned this for a while, and that you can always hear the drumming, and you can see drums all over the place. And there is actually a shop in Thunderbluff that sells drums. You just can't actually talk to the NPC, and so when you're in that place, you're hearing the drumming going, you're thinking, is this a soundtrack or is this a sound effect? Is someone playing a drum and it's just always around the corner, but you believe it's there. Same in Silvermoon. You can imagine some guy's just there playing on his cello in the background somewhere. You just never meet him. And it's that difference between music that sounds like it's from the place rather than being a layer on top of the place.
It's so amazing how they did that, and how I would argue that, I would say specifically vanilla and some BC music as well, really never gets old, because it's as much as part of the terrain as anything else.
Yeah.
So you did say that. Sorry, go ahead. please.
I was just going to say as a quick another in Wrath of the Lich King as well. You know, you've got the
Wrath too, yeah.
Is it Berean Tundra? No, the one
The Grizzly Hills.
Grizzly Hills.
Yeah. The Grizzle Maw, yeah.
Yeah, that's another example. You could imagine some dude playing that.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Just down the river, you can hear it echoing around. All of that sort of thing. It makes you feel like it's part of it. And just as another aside, you mentioned before about the music just being little subtle snippets, and it's not quite enough to get a full image of what it is. It reminds me of the Alien movies, you know, really old school horror movies where they didn't have the budget or the capability, you know, graphically to show you exactly what the monster looks like. So you only saw little tiny, small frames of it running across, and you don't get a clear image of it. That's sort of how the music works in Classic. You get these little snippets. It's just enough for you to understand what's going on and to get really into it, and then it disappears and you're left wanting more, and the brain sort of creates the rest for you in your imagination.
And it works perfectly.
Yeah, it does. But you also mentioned something when you're talking about Boralus, is that today they use actual orchestras. So what did they do back then? Did they not have?
No, I think for the original game they recorded voices. I think the voices are real. Not all of them, mind you, but for example, you know, the Gloria piece of music, I don't know where that plays, but like Gloria on Edifice, you know, all of this stuff, those are real people, I think.
Yeah.
Everything else is MIDI, which is just you know, electronic synthesized instruments. They sound great. To be honest, you don't listen to it and think, hang on a second, these aren't real instruments. You know, it's not Game Boy style music.
Right. No.
I love 8-bit music, you know.
Yeah.
But one of my first videos I did exploring the music of WoW was looking at Honor Hold. And so I initially started up this musical notation software, Sibelius, and I was going to write out exactly, okay, trumpet plays this note here and transcribe the whole thing. And then I realized, one second, these instruments are fading into one another. Like, this doesn't sound like a real orchestra at all. And I realized, oh wait, that's because this is all synthesizers. They sound nice. And so that's because they couldn't afford to hire an orchestra back then. I mean, we've all been hearing the stories from John Statz and Mark Kern and all that about how wild the original development days of Classic WoW were, and that they didn't have the resources to do any of that, like hiring philharmonic orchestras. That's a lot of very skilled people to pay for a recording session. So nowadays they do have the money to do that, and the music sounds very different. It's written for those people, and you have to write differently for an orchestra. But it raises an interesting question of changes versus no changes, because people are having this debate over gameplay and graphical changes. But think about it, in everything that Blizzard releases now is recorded by a live orchestra because it sounds great, and it genuinely does. The music of WoW sounds wonderful. But it is a definite possibility. I don't think they'll do it. I think they'll probably overlook this. But it's certainly a possibility that Blizzard could put their quality of seal of quality stamp on it and say, no, we want to make an upgraded version of the classic WoW soundtrack with live instruments. Our in-house orchestra is going to play it and it's going to sound wonderful. But would that change the experience of the game for everyone? I think it would.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it would have changed the experience even more so for me than upgraded character models, than upgraded animations, because for me, right, the world is like the biggest character in the game that I play with every day. It's the world of Warcraft, right? And every time I log on, the world is basically everything I interact with.
Absolutely.
And the music is just as much a part of that world as everything else. So if you were to change that, you would completely change Classic, and I would argue that it would not be Classic without that music.
Yeah. I also like about Classic, we kind of touched upon this a little bit, but I think we kind of overlooked it, was that it's less ostentatious, right? So you have this, like, the music is much lower, it's much part of, it's part of the atmosphere. But what you also see is that the music is similar if the zone is similar, right?
Yes.
So across different biomes, you have this. If I can get an example, Chimley, if you can help me out here.
So Morogh and Winterspring,
right?
They are both places that look very similar. They're both snowy, and I actually thought they had exactly the same music for a long time because, to tell the truth, I didn't get to level cap in Classic, apart from the stories, but we're not supposed to talk about that. But I got to level cap a few days before they shut down the service, so I didn't get to explore much of Winterspring. And the same goes with Tirisfal Glades and Duskwood. I thought they were the same, but recently I've found they are subtly different. But the reason that they sound so similar is because they use similar sort of musical language. So for the spooky music, they use a lot of sound effects and distorted instruments, like a lot of studio effects. That it's less proper, classical instrumentation and more, modern stuff, really. And my video on Undercity, I go into that sort of stuff in more depth, but it's really interesting what they do. And in Winterspring and Dunmarach, you've got a long history of music that's trying to explore snowy, sound painting with high-pitched stuff and twinkly little piano piece. Like there's a piano that plays in Dunmarach that I think Bellular finishes a lot of his videos on, which I'm really annoyed about because I want to steal that.
Yeah, it's like I know
exactly. What's so cool though? You really get the feeling of like walking around with snow falling, like the little twinkling and almost like just walking around in this frozen tundra where but it has this warmth to it as well that you feel.
Like it sounds like Christmas.
Exactly. For me, I get this warmth whenever it snows. It's this kind of warm feeling I get, and I get that from the music from Dunmarach and from Winterspring, and it's so amazing how they do that.
I've been trying to figure out what that is because it's really weird how that works, and at least part of it, I think, might be if you have the snow covering everything, it soaks up a lot of sound. I think it soaks up a lot of the big wavelengths, like the lower frequency thing. So the lower notes of the scale, and so the high pitched stuff sort of carries over that isn't as absorbed as much. That's just a theory of mine, but maybe that's part of the reason why high pitched music sort of like twinkly little things with nice reverb sounds
and like wind blowing and like you hear like the wind and it just gives you that feel of
it's all muffled and warm.
Yeah. But the atmospheric noises that we hear in, like, say, Undercity or in other places, that is really interesting too because I can't put a finger on it, but it seems like that didn't really pass on that much into later expansions with those atmospheric noises and things like that. And it really gave a creepy, eerie feel to places like Undercity and Duskwood, where you really didn't sometimes I remember being in Undercity and later on in Naxxramas you hear things like people screaming and was it a baby crying in one corner?
So before you
Yeah.
kill Thaddeus, there's all these like moans and cries, and after you kill him, I
Yeah.
think they go away, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But
It's
is that
so
to make you?
metal.
That's to make it like uneasing, to unease
Yeah.
you. I think is that what is they're doing, Chimley, with the music. I think that's
Yeah, definitely. And in Duskwood, for example, they have sections where the music flits between your ears really quickly. You know, if you're
Yes.
wearing headphones, it gives you this weird aural effect. You're like, oh wow, you're used to the music coming at you equally from both sides, or maybe a directional thing from one way. But when the music's flicking really quickly between your ears, it does this in Undercity as well. It's purposefully unsettling. They're trying to. It'll be imperceptible from with you as you're playing. You're not going to really notice it, but it'll be influencing how you feel. And I guess that goes back to what you were saying before about how there's music that have different ideas, right? The snowy sort of music, the scary music, the fighting music, and these, instead of maybe in the modern game where you've got 20 minutes of music for a zone, and so every little individual area has its own theme. Instead of that, in the modern version of the game, they have music that conveys a certain emotion. It tells you how you're supposed to feel rather than telling you what this place is, where it is. So, Meldron, you brought up the sacred music before, and that you can talk a bit about that maybe.
I was talking about that, but the sacred music is so if you guys know, there's the Stormwind music that you go when you walk inside Stormwind, but if you go inside like the Abbey or any church as well, you get the sacred music.
It starts
and
like it starts like that or something, and then
it has this really, I grew up Catholic, right? So it has this really renowned like Catholic, choir feeling to it, and the words medieval are just this medieval symphony, and you have like the choir and the person singing, and this just really regal feel, this old traditional church feel, but it also just screams like honor and paladins or priests and for the light, and it's just like heroes and knights, and I just think of like King Arthur and things like that just come to mind. And just being in Stormwind or being in the Cathedral District and hearing that music, and especially someone who plays priests and paladins, it just really gets to my soul, and I just love that music. It's one of my favorite the sacred song is one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, it's really good.
And WoW. Yeah.
So it's like going back to the Rivendell thing as well, like how that music, you were ready to hear it because you heard so with the sacred music, there's like Latin, I think it is, or it's sort of faux Latin. It sounds like Latin. In some of the music of WoW, the music, the words they say in Classic is almost always in Latin. Which is a really interesting choice because obviously that doesn't exist in Warcraft. Everyone's speaking Common, not Latin.
Right.
So it's trying to invoke these sort of Catholic or just Christian, this history from which priests and paladins and the Holy Light, all of these fantasy tropes, they didn't come from nowhere. It's igniting something within your knowledge of history and helping you immerse yourself further in the role playing aspect of the game, which is why WoW was great. The role
exactly, absolutely. There's another piece of music I think we haven't touched upon yet. It's the you'll hear it in SFK, and you'll also hear it in Molten Core, and a lot of people love it. And it's called Battle. So why is that so familiar? Why is everyone remembering that song so much, Chimley? Why is that so, like, people hear it and it's like, oh my god, that song?
Yeah. So there's a really interesting thing. Well, the time signature is what's interesting there. So the rhythm, effectively. So you've got a group of 6 and a group of 7. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that your brain's like, oh, okay, are we in 6? Are we in 7? Things are never in 7. If something's in 7, it's really it'll stand out to you because your brain really wants to stick things into groups of 3 or 4 when it comes to music. Nothing else. It doesn't. It's just likes nice round numbers like that. So if you have something like 5 or 7, it's really unusual. So because at least when I think of that music, I think of the spiral staircase in Shadowfang Keep. You know that one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. Where all the Worgen are,
describes that. So it's going, up on 6 and then up on 7, and it's like this rising feeling. It's always going up.
It's always rising, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like
it's sort of
being chased as well, I feel like.
Yeah. It's like an audio illusion, effectively. And interestingly, the title screen music of WoW is in 7 as well. That's in 7 as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And
interesting.
Yeah, that's another. I think that's really clever of them to do, because you never hear 7, and it's really memorable. And I think that's a large part of the reason why.
Is it just me, or does it almost feel like it keeps you on the edge of your seat and waiting for something more? And it's like, something's about to happen, or this is about to happen. And whenever I know in SFK and you hear that music, if someone goes AFK, I'm like, oh, what are you doing? Like the music's going.
Yeah, the music's going, and we can't stop right now. Yeah, exactly.
What is this tank doing? Like,
yeah, I think it also makes you tank better. Like when I tank SFK and that music comes on, I feel like I'm more ready to tank.
You just charge like a beast anyway. Phil.
No, what I mean is, can music have an effect like that where it makes you? And I know it can, but I'm asking rhetorically. But can music make your reaction time shorter because of the?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was looking at some studies in my last year, and they've done studies testing, playing different styles of music to people, and it can increase your adrenaline, all of this sort of thing. You can really influence people physically through music.
Yeah.
And reading some of the textbooks from game composers about how to write for games, there's a whole category that's basically like, this is a kind of music that influences your player's metabolism. This will make them do X, Y, or Z. The battle music, they've got it in a whole category of, okay, play this when shit's going down. The reason they do that is because the drums playing, and they got the horns blaring, and the time signature is really weird, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. All of that, you're having a physical reaction to it as well. That's sort of involuntary.
I guess that's why armies have played music on the battlefield for years, right?
Yeah.
That's really cool. And speaking about the SFK thing we were talking about a little bit earlier, but the song that you get to once, it kind of goes into this really quick split once you get into the room where all the wolves are. It's like this almost Middle Eastern kind of sound. Din, 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 that song where it goes into.
Yeah, it's like din, 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 din,
yeah.
din, din, din.
I can't think what it's called, but yeah. It's just such a profound difference from what we heard before into this now. And it's like, okay, we're entering a different zone. Things are going to get different here, and actually that part is probably one of the hardest wings of SFK. If you don't pull right, you're gonna wipe. So it's like, okay, focus now. Like, let's focus. Maybe we should stop just rushing and kind of figure out what we're doing here.
Yeah, it's interesting how it really is. There's a lot of Arabian styles of music going on in there with the drumming. It's like they use particular sort of drums from that culture. They're very particular sound to them, and it's in a 6/8 sort of feel. 1, 2, 3, 1. Yeah, so it's in a 6 sort of beat, and it's a dance almost.
Yeah, it is.
It's a combat dance. And it reminds me strangely of Teldrassil. And what I mean by that is it reminds me of the architecture of Teldrassil. And what I mean by that is that one of the things I really like about WoW is that it combines so many different influences. So, think about Teldrassil. You've got all of this sort of Tolkien-esque fantasy of elves. It's also, Norse influence. That's where he got all of those ideas from. And all of the other things that go into the elven culture that they have in WoW. But then you look at the buildings, and it's like, wow, this is like Asian, this is Oriental architecture, and this melding of different cultures in a new way that it just works. It's just completely Warcraft. They're the only people that do this, you know.
Yes. I mean,
who ever thought that elves would live in pagodas, you know?
I know, right? And you know, even going into like the Dwarven song, like in Ironforge, like you get this feeling of this ancient city, you know, big and just this I mean, I really get this feel of like the Dwarven, and you feel like you're in this mountain inside this huge city that's so ancient and just really, really well, just like defended, and you know, it just has this feeling of being part of something bigger, and I love that. And then you go outside into the cold of Dun Morogh, and it's such a big change, you know, from the inside Ironforge to outside into Dun Morogh.
Yeah. They're masters of knowing which instruments to use and how many of them, really.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite piece of music in classic WoW, Chimley?
Oh God, you can't ask me that question.
You gotta answer it. You can do one of me and just name everything off the table.
A better question would be like, which one scares you the most? Because I know I'm gonna have to do a video on them, and like the ones I like the most.
That's a great question. Which one do you think is the biggest challenge making a scorecraft? That's the change.
You know, Karazhan's up there. That's like the first thing I ever, like when I was, you know, 13, 14, like just barely getting into playing music. I tried to like I played that on piano, and I like figured out how it went. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do this. So exciting for me. So actually doing Karazhan, that'll be a scary one. But the Teldrassil music, the Ashenvale music, all of that elf stuff, it's so good. It's so important. You know, this music is, as far as I'm concerned, part of the modern generation of classical music. You know, people, I get really frustrated with people in the actual classical music world that, you know, think, oh, this modern composer, and I could tell you a lot of stories about some Emperor's New Clothes type stuff in music that makes me really angry. You know, there's some great music being written, but there's a lot of terrible stuff that people are pretending. You know what I mean? And they're not paying attention to this, which I think is a travesty. And I think eventually people will recognize this for how important it really is.
Thank you for the work you've been doing, Chimley. If you guys haven't seen his Scorecraft videos, I'm sure you guys will check it out, because after listening to him talk now, you probably know this guy knows his shit about music. So
that's absolutely true. I think we objectively say that Chimley knows music, and
he does such a great job. I just want to say, like on the actual on your writing as well, like in your story and how you tell the story and how the person or the writers, you know, you almost get a feeling of what they were thinking. And it sounds weird, but you kind of get this like behind the scenes look. And for me, and I leave like comments about this all the time, and it's like hearing the song again for the first time, but in a different way, because you get to see what was put behind it, and it's really, really interesting. And it's weird because I love the music of WoW, and especially classic WoW, but it wasn't until that I heard your Scorecraft videos that I think I gave it the appreciation that it deserves.
Oh, thank you very much.
You know? Yeah.
They take an awful lot of time and effort to make, but it's really worth it. Especially when I read the comments from you guys and other people. It makes me feel like, oh gosh, I got a lot to live up to here. But it's important because this music means so much to so many people.
That's true.
You know, you say that I'm an expert in all of this, and yeah, I guess I've studied it. But to be honest, I learn something every time I do this. You know, every piece of music I look into, it's partly a way for me to keep learning, because the guys that it's not just one person that makes this music; it's a whole team of people, and they're all experts. And so, you know, it's really like it's like a scientist trying to peel back, you know, the layers of reality and figure out, okay, what's really going on here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this special video, and you will see this both on our channel and on Chimley's channel. And it was wonderful being here with you, Chimley, and Def Camp. Wonderful being here with you.
I had a great time. I could go on talking about this for hours, but we can't do that because.
Yes, I would just like to end by saying, within its maybe some people can think of the music as simplistic, but it's really not. It's driving home the story. It's driving the story in a way that's kind of for the player, right? So the player and the story are kind of, the music are kind of working together. The story, the music isn't creating the story for you. It's all coming together at one. You know, you're all journeying together. The music included. So.
And guys, let us know, what is your favorite music in Classic WoW?
Yeah, let us know.
And it doesn't have to be Classic WoW. It can be like Chimley, it can be Karazhan and BC. But you know, let's first say what's your favorite in Classic, and then give us what's your favorite in all-time WoW. So let us know.
Well, guys, this is Melderon signing off.
Def Camp.
And Chimley. Stay chim, everyone. I'll see you next time.
See ya.
Peace.